In this video, I'm explaining the capabilities and the configuration of the Quantum SD-WAN solution based on a small lab for the local internet breakout capabilities. The security gateway that I'm using is having two external network interfaces, and I'm using the capabilities for application control URL filtering, and because of resource constraints, I'm just doing threat prevention for known attacks. Of course, in a real-life environment, I would have used the threat prevention for unknown attacks, or even I would have used the autonomous threat prevention functionalities. Note that I'm not hiding automatically anything behind the gateway, not as explained later in this video. The Quantum SD-WAN solution is managed by the Smart Management Server for everything that is related to security, and the traffic steering, the SD-WAN, is managed by the Infinity Next portal. Because we have the Infinity Next portal, which is a web-based interface, I'm using even our Web Smart Console to manage the security policy. Because in this way, I'm having a convenient, unified possibility to manage security and the traffic steering all from the same web look and feel. Note that I have defined a security policy for Teams. Microsoft Teams is allowed with detailed and accounting. And I have a YouTube rule for the access row sales. So sales users can use YouTube, and note that anyone else sitting on this network will have to accept that there is a limitation in down and uploading when working with YouTube. The news and media category is accepted. And note that for granularity purposes, I'm enabling HTTPS inspection just to make sure that my application control is matching as it should. And for the threat prevention policy, I'm using a simply optimized profile that I assign to traffic that is targeted to this network. Of course, another reason for enabling HTTPS inspection is to perform threat prevention on all traffic. The SD-WAN traffic steering policy is defined in the Infinity Next portal. And here we see that there is a rule for the Microsoft Teams application to get steered according the best available steering object. And we have the same steering object used for everyone from the sales team using YouTube. And anyone else who is not part of the sales team will have the traffic steered according to the lower speed steering object. News websites will as well use the lower steering object. Before we look at the behavior steering, we look at the WAN link mapping. So we identify a service provider object that is mapped against an interface where this service provider can be reached. On the security gateway, we need manually to define currently the interface mapping to the relevant steering object. So what we define is, if we look at here, the ISP main, which is having a tag, and then the Ethernet 2 assignment, we see that we have an assignment here of this tag to this interface. And we define the next routing hop, the next hop here in the command set SD-WAN. And the same has been done for the Ethernet 1 interface. We define the next hop for the routing for the SD-WAN traffic steering here in the set SD-WAN command. And the set SD-WAN command has a series of options we define the interface, the next hop, and then we define the keyword override to enforce it to make it active immediately. The NAT value is for future use. We see that network address translation is controlled using the network object, where we define that the network address translation is automatically performed on the network object. So now that we have understood the WAN link mapping and the traffic routing and forwarding functionality, we can look at the behaviors. So we have ISP service providers. These service providers are the ones that we have mapped against our interfaces, and here we define their characteristics. And we have another service provider with limited bandwidth. We now can look at a steering object. A steering object is describing the behavior, how the wide area network interfaces should be used. In this example, we use all relevant, and just to make it more transparent, I have used the lower option here. So you see I just have 2 wide area network interfaces and 2 ISPs mapped to it. And if I look at the criteria is defined here, and the methodology to measure the criteria, if the criteria is met or not, is defined using ping. We have the ability to select link aggregation, so all available links will be used for the traffic, or to prioritize a selected link. And in the lower speed steering object of type local breakout, I have used the methodology to prioritize the link selection, but not on tiebreakers, but on a manual order. So I want to have the limited bandwidth to use before the other ISP. I could have even selected the link attribute measuring methodology. In order to avoid that links are flapping, we have the option to define margins. So only if these margins here are exceeded based on these thresholds, then a link will no longer be liable for traffic. If we look at the SD-WAN agent, the SD-WAN agent is deployed and the agent has last time connected, and we can deploy the SD-WAN agents using the profiles menu, and we see which is the policy version that is currently enforced on this SD-WAN agent. And the objects that we have configured on the network management server, on the on-premises management server, these objects are synchronized with the Infinity Next agents so that we can use these objects in the SD-WAN steering policy. If I'm now using a computer that is sitting behind the security gateway and I'm going to a YouTube site as a regular user in this network, we see the page is popping up, and then we can check the logs in our Web Smart Console for YouTube to see and we do see that we have even today a filter for SD-WAN, and if we look at application control, we notice that the client computer has a session log related, and the session is for the application YouTube. And if we double click on this session log, we see that we have YouTube. The traffic was inspected by HTTPS inspection. and we have a lot of TCP connections related to this session. And if we look at the details of one of those, we see that under the More settings, we find an SD-WAN rule number and the outgoing ISP that has been selected for this traffic. If we are using Smart Console to see the same traffic log messages, we see when we double click on the connection log that we now have in Smart Console a dedicated section for SD-WAN. Logging and monitoring is anyhow subject to changes in the following weeks because the SD-WAN solution, as you know, is still under early availability. On the security gateway, we can use CPView to monitor the SD-WAN link probing functionalities. So we see the probe target is currently having latency and jitter like you see here. And the next hop is measured as well. And we see which service provider is currently chosen. If I now perform a logon to the security gateway, and I am an authenticated user. So now I'm an authenticated user, and as an authenticated user, I'm going to YouTube. What we expect is that this user is part of, Sally is part of the sales group, so that now we see log messages related to her. Let's refresh. I see log messages for Sally, YouTube. So if I double click on this and I look at the connection, traffic, not more, and we see that the ISP main has been used for the traffic of Sally sales. So everything works as expected because we wanted to prioritize Sally over the regular users. Thank you for watching this short video as an introduction to the Checkpoint Quantum SD-WAN solution.